So I wanted to give a quick shout out to the sponsors of Startup Sack, without whose support we would not be able to do the things we do. And so those sponsors are Witten Law, SMUD, Bender Insurance, Nivigen, Stoll Reeves, Weintraub Tobin, Ernst & Young, Clifton Larson Allen, and Moneta Ventures. Thank you all. And if any of you are here, thank you. We appreciate your support. I want to kick it off and welcome our guest speaker today, Joshua Tillman. We'd like to welcome Joshua. He's the CEO of Concur, which was formerly known as DialSource, which is as a native application for both Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics 365. Concur works inside CRM, making sales and service teams more effective at gaining access, growing pipeline, winning revenue, and strengthening customer relationships. Concur's technology makes it simple to plan, execute, and optimize every customer interaction directly within the CRM platform that businesses already use today, expanding core capabilities that are critical for digital sellers. They're fresh off a recent rebrand and product launch, and Concur has expanded its offerings from its core enterprise voice technology to support a complete omnichannel approach for teams engaging with customers and prospects across voice, email, SMS, and social channels such as LinkedIn. Joshua started Concur in 2005 based on a UC Davis research project focusing on the modernization of telephony technology. And Joshua has shared a video that I'm going to share with everybody. So let me do that right now.
We can. Yep.
Awesome. Can you hear it?
It'll start in just a second.
Okay. There we go.
Create cadences for individuals and teams right inside Salesforce. Build a roadmap that district managers follow to execute consistent, personalized outreach each time, making them 2 times more efficient and reducing 90% of manual steps. District managers move seamlessly from touchpoint to touchpoint without the guesswork, without wondering what to do or say next. Track, measure, and improve every aspect of engagement to guide your seller's workflow, saving 4 hours of district managers' time each day. With a single click, sellers send a text, make a call, or leave a pre-recorded message. Meanwhile, Concur logs each interaction and moves the prospect to the next appropriate step. Teams spend more time advancing opportunities, less time figuring out what to do or completing busy work. Your district managers love Concur.
Awesome. Everybody want to go out and buy Concur right now? Awesome. Well, so awesome introduction. We never had anybody supply a video for that, for one of these events before, but Joshua, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that with us. And that kind of explained to us a little bit about what Concur does, but maybe we can start way back. You're as a student in 2005 at UC Davis. And you created this as a student project there. Maybe tell us about the early origins of Concur, then known as DialSource, as that student project at UC Davis.
Yeah, so while I was a student at UC Davis, I had several internships on Wall Street. And in those internships, they were sales application internships, and a lot of it had to do with making phone calls to potential prospects or high net worth individuals that the firm wanted to sell stock portfolios to, et cetera. And so I was unable to have a reasonable amount of live conversations by simply picking up the phone and manually calling phone numbers out of an Excel book, or at that time, a printout that somebody handed me, to then write down all of my notes on the side of the piece of paper, and then to organize who to follow up, when to follow up, why to follow up, and to what product conversation to follow up in regard. And so that became a research paper. That internship, I went and I convinced a professor at Davis and Berkeley to allow me to do a joint university project and thesis paper, which became the technological thesis to build the first prototype of building an intelligent multi-line dialing system to allow me to be as effective as 35 to 40 people making outbound calls. And then I had a CRM-based component into it. So when I'm having a conversation with Jeff, I'm taking all my notes into it. At the time, we actually named it Refractive Dialer because we were a bunch of geeky engineers into photography. I ran as a photographer for the Aggie at Davis at the time. And so I was looking at it as like a prism refracting light, like we were doing in phone lines, hence refractive dialer. Nobody could spell the domain properly or on the phone say it. So it was always reflective dialer, retactive dialer, whatever it was never the right name. And so we had some good success from there in the prototype and the paper. And then we started working on the business after that.
So had you ever had inclinations towards entrepreneurship growing up, or was this kind of the first idea or time that you had an idea of this is a great idea?
I did have inclinations.
Yeah.
I was probably starting businesses as early as I can remember, from starting a lawnmower business / cleaning up neighbors' yards for pay to buy whatever Nintendo game I wanted at the time, or Ninja Turtle or G.I. Joe or whatever it is I wanted. It was clear to me that if I figured out a way to do it, then I would stumble from A to B to C and eventually make it real. And then from there, which was a pretty good gig for a couple of years, I'd say around junior high, I started working in context timeline. I started building out computers by assembling the parts and selling them to my dad's buddies that were lawyers and bankers, et cetera, so they could, I remember, film their daughter in equestrian events and process that, which was not an easy thing to do in 99 or 98 when this was going on. And you couldn't just walk into a store and buy a computer at that point. You were ordering it from Gateway or Micron or Dell at the time. And so I was ordering parts and putting that together. So I kind of jumped from one to the next to building out gaming rigs, and then rigs for my friends, and then charging them just enough to buy that next graphic card or RAM or whatever I needed at the time to make next build. So yeah, I think I've always had that spirit.
So entrepreneurship's kind of in your DNA, in your blood.
Yeah, for better or worse, it is.
So I'm curious about the transition from just your student project idea to how the company has grown now over the last 16 years. I mean, when you started this, you wrote a lot of the initial code. You've obviously had to build a team as this has grown, a team around you that has contributed to that success. What have been some of the key hiring decisions, and what advice do you have for building a successful team to go from that initial idea on up to the scalable, fast-growing company that it is now?
So one of the things my board tells me all the time, which I like, is separate what I think I know from what I actually know. It's powerful to reflect back with that simple statement for just about every problem, personally or professionally. So that's one thing I would look at, is ways to look at the lens and simplify the problem as much as possible. I would also say, unfortunately, who gets us here doesn't get us there. So it's also a thing about hire quick and fire quick. As callous as that sounds, the organization has a duty to the people that are busting their ass all day, every day, across the other business units that are vested when we gave them stock and pay from our investors to DCA to all the people that we have to work with. And it is not easy to grow an idea out of nothing into a functionable, tangible product, especially at scale. And so you have to be constantly self-enriching and iterating across the various business units to make sure that you just don't die of stagnation.
So, what were some of those early phases? I mean, you launched, I think, in 2005, was it? And so I assume there was a little bit of time where, very early stage and kind of just forming. And what point did you kind of like, okay, this is a real thing and you're starting to grow? At what point did that happen?
Well, we had a typical approach, spending a exorbitant amount of time in product first for engineering, as opposed to what I think most software, especially SaaS organizations, do, which is have the sales application, try to get revenue as much as possible, and then try to Band-Aid and paperclip a solution, which is not a great way to do it when you're trying to go from enterprise organizations, complexity, compliance, security. And so we spent an atypical amount of time in that engineering phase. So we didn't really start to get serious probably until like the 2012, maybe 2013, 14, in terms of now let's focus on core components of the product and sell as much of it necessary to get the next engineer to. Let's seriously think about building a sales team. Let's think about having a marketing asset. Let's think about putting more money into general counsel to help us proactively identify and solve all kinds of problems that we think we may encounter or are not smart enough to see coming, but they are.
So one of the questions I wonder is, you've created this thing. This is your baby that you created as a student. And I got to think it's got to be tough to hand that over as the initial developer to a team of developers. How was that experience for you in handing that over? And
Not difficult at all.
No? Okay.
No. Then very quickly, that wasn't my core strength. And so I wanted to identify brilliant engineers to come in and take my idea, or the idea that grew within the various businesses of our organization, and then build product around it. So I'd say the flip side is not difficult to let it go. The difficult component is to find somebody competent enough to take it to the next level, which has been difficult to do. But I think that especially where we are today as an organization, where we've been for the last couple of years, since we started the Conquer journey from an engineering perspective, we're in an extremely good position, and found ourselves recently in our first Magic Quadrant in the top right corner, which is where you want to be.
So I guess the key is understanding and knowing what your strengths are and where you need to hire people to take over the things that maybe aren't your strengths.
Well, generally it's the things that are most difficult to do. I don't get to do things I like to do because those are easy things to do. I have to do the things that are most difficult to do that I am unable at a certain point to just simply hand off to some executive within the organization, because we have to figure out some blueprint in identifying the customer problem and wrapping product around it in some cases. Or, as I like to say, it's people, process, and technology that equals the output. And it's managing any of those individual or multiple variables, just like in basic algebra. And that's not always obvious, and we've got to go figure it out.
Mm-hmm. So over time, you've had to pivot, I think, to adjust to what customers want. What are some of the key lessons you can share we've got a lot of early stage founders here. How and when do you recognize the need to pivot?
Always be prepared to pivot at a given moment. I mean, who was really ready for COVID? Or knew how long it would last, or to what implication, or what industry segment. COVID was not terrible for us. It wasn't wonderful for us. We were kind of somewhere more in like, it was actually kind of good for us because everybody had to figure out how to enable their teams to work remotely. And so we did webinars right in the beginning of COVID with the president of the Los Angeles Clippers, a customer, and the senior director of revenue operations for Paychex, the payroll company. And it was a really interesting story that the VP told about the Clippers, where he was talking about the commissioner having a league meeting on like that Friday saying, don't worry, things are gonna get slow, but we're not gonna cancel the season. We're not gonna have to do all these things. And then like 3 hours later, season's canceled. And it's up to everybody to figure out how to enable their sellers to make calls and receive calls from the Clippers client base over what's going on. They were doing that in 5 minutes with
Wow.
DialSource at the time, now Concur. And so those were really good use cases for us to highlight adoption and problem solving. But on the flip side is like, what's the product that they have to offer and sell when they can't have players in the arena and they can't have people in the seats? So then we wind up seeing contraction across various industry segments because it's outside of anybody's control. I very distinctly remember a conversation with the CTO of Madison Square Garden that I was very paranoid about at the time, because they were coming out of a 3-year contract with us in like October of last year, and nobody knew what the hell was going on with professional sports, or when they could open up, or when they could start doing this. I mean, it was early in vaccine discussions. And so how do you prepare for that? But the conversation with the CTO of the Garden was, we have become smarter and more efficient as a result of the technology, so we can't afford to just let it go. But our sales team is contracted by 90%, and so we want to be able to maintain a contract and expand with Concur, but we lost 90% of a contract right there. Which is a hell of a lot better than losing all of it, because they signed a multi-year renewal, and as things are now opening up and they're preparing for next season, they're rehiring and they're putting everybody back on the product with new learning lessons. So pivot frequently, pivot always, and learn efficiently as a result.
Is it more about being nimble and quick and agile and being able to adjust to changing conditions? Obviously, you can't plan have advanced strategies and scenarios planned out for a pandemic. So you got to be able to just adapt and respond to these things.
Instantly. Right? Yeah, instantly. It's a skill that I think I'm particularly good at. It's a skill that I've been good at training across our executive layer as well, which has helped us as an organization, no pun intended, conquer the day. I mean, conquer the product, conquer the problem.
Awesome. So kind of along the lines of pivoting, you recently led the company through a rebranding and expanded your offerings. And I'm guessing that rebranding company has a lot of issues to consider and potential side effects. What are some of the issues you took under consideration in the rebrand, and what lessons did you learn in the process that you can share with other startups here?
The process was about 1.5 to 2 years from end to end. So it was quite a heavy lift. So I think one of the important questions is why and when did it start? So my largest customers were coming to me and saying that the name DialSource made sense when we were solving problems from 5 or 10 years ago, but that we were solving much bigger, more complicated problems today, or whatever the time was a year ago, than what they initially had consumed for. And they were encouraging me to consider an abstract brand name that I could grow into, as opposed to be productized. And so that was a 6-month exercise across our board of directors, head of departments. Tim, our VP of marketing, was working on it around the clock with his entire team. And so we went through, I mean, no, it's not an arbitrary number. We went through about 1,000 names and exercise to continue to whittle down and whittle down and whittle down and continue to present. The board of directors continued to shut us down on the names, thinking it wasn't innovative enough. When we presented Concur, we got unanimous 5 of 5. That is it. That's the name. And so it came down to who I am as an individual going into a lot of the most complicated problems and wanting to build a solution around it. So conquering adversity, conquering engineering, conquering problems. And so they liked that a lot. And then we started to test the name and just kind of like meetings, like rebrand meetings, when we were doing like QBRs with some of our big customers saying, hey, we're thinking about going this direction. You know what our new product is going to do. Here's some of the naming that we're thinking about, and getting input from that. It's not just an entire new quarterly business review. So when you've got a big customer, they want to review everything that's happening the last quarter or the last year, like the end of Q1 and 2020 results as an example. And so we would kind of like float some of those names to get some of that feedback from them. But it's not just a massive branding lift from the website, all the landing pages, the support documentation, the installation guides, but probably 50,000 lines of code that represented DialSource and all kinds of things, from Salesforce programmatic language managed packages, Microsoft Dynamics, security components. I mean, it is monstrous.
So yeah, and I imagine, yeah, you had a lot invested in the original name. So I think a takeaway for a lot of early startups is carefully consider your name and your branding early on, and consider what that might have to change for the future markets, right?
My advice would be what I was given, which is think about an abstraction of something that represent the mantra of where you want to be in the future, not where you are today.
Awesome. So a lot of people are here. Always, a lot of people come to these are always looking for advice on how to raise money. You've raised a fairly significant amount of venture capital over the years. What advice would you give to startups who are starting to look for raising capital from either angels or VCs?
My philosophy was be a product first led organization to solve problem and build good engineering around it. That is not the thesis that a lot of other organizations have taken. And I say that not to be critical to one side or the other, but there is no silver bullet answer. There is, I would say, have a solid product that customers love and grow those customers, sign net new customers, and highlight the success of those customers, and the investors will show up at your door.
Yeah, so really that kind of leads into my next question is a lot of attention goes to VC and investments, but those who focus on funding through sales revenue are really what VCs want to see and want to invest in. So what has been the key to Conquer's sales strategy, and how has that changed as the company has grown and evolved?
That's probably one of our most fluid theses within the organization. Conquer is a more powerful product that's easier to demonstrate, easier to understand, easier to install, and easier to implement at scale. Those are very difficult things to check one at a time, much less all together than DialSource was. And so I would say looking at variables like that is a good way to go about it. So then where do I go from here? The next place I want to go from here is I want to make Conquer a self-installable managed package that takes little to no effort by any engineer on my team. But that's a complicated hill to run up, because it's not just like on my iPhone, go to the App Store and download an application for 3 or 4 or 5,000 people around the world to use it in a single install.
So you just touched on your vision of the future. Kind of maybe paint a picture for us. What's next for Conquer?
We want to redefine how businesses communicate with customers and customers communicate with businesses. And what I mean by that is make it easier. Like if I call Jeff misses the call, you can then text me back, ask for some information via an email. I send it to you. You may read it and then comment about it on LinkedIn. I want all of those communication pathways owned by Conquer within the CRM in a secure and compliant manner for global Fortune 100. And I want to then be able to take that and make it self-installable. So if you're a 5-person startup, you can click a button and install it and yield the same benefit without the same level of effort.
So I'm getting the impression you spend a lot of time strategizing about the future and planning for the future. And I'm kind of curious what advice you would have for startups about strategizing and envisioning that future, and what can they do to incorporate that kind of the philosophy you have spoken about into their businesses?
Don't let analysis get, listen, what's the right term I say all the time? Don't allow analysis to paralysis. I see this all the time in organizations where they're looking for that silver bullet answer. Iterate quickly, identify mistakes quickly, and learn from them. I don't really learn from my successes. I learn from my failures.
Awesome. So I wanted to switch gears just a little bit. I did some research on the Sacramento Business Journal. Shout out to those from the Biz Journal who are here. Where you said in one interview a few years ago that you're fascinated by the growth and innovation and technology within Sacramento. So I'm kind of curious, what are your impressions of how innovation and technology has evolved in the region over the years that you've been in business?
An interesting question. Our philosophy has changed because it had to during COVID. We had deep relationships with the University of California and recruited heavily out of University of California. Deep partners of our organization. Some of my most badass people I personally picked out of the vendor floor out of Davis 7 and 8 years ago. It's crazy to say that. Some of the people we just hired last week, same type of thing. I just didn't pick them myself at the vendor floor. They went through the normal hiring channels. With COVID, we didn't really have a choice. I mean, in all candor, we were not allowed to go back to our offices, and we expanded to major offices in the Arden area, right before COVID, like 4 or 5 months before COVID. And so we weren't allowed to go back, and we were getting letters all the time about additional COVID cases spiking in the office complex. And then employees were seeing that, and employees didn't want to go back. And so we had a long strategic conversation internally about, what about just opening up the hiring pool to everywhere? We wanted everybody to be in Sacramento, and it was a thesis of our organization until we weren't allowed to do it anymore, or didn't have to do it anymore because they had to work from home. And so it goes back to who was ready for that. I mean, we had the tech for it. For about 16 years old, the first 8 years of our business was remote. And then when we did Series A, we started opening up our first physical offices on Fulton. And then when COVID hit, like, we went right back to what we knew. We had 8 years out, not in office, 8 years in offices. And then we had to pivot back immediately when the offices were forced and it wasn't a choice. And I hired a VP of sales in Atlanta, Georgia. I hired people in Chicago. We started hiring more people in EMEA to handle our Fortune 100, 200, 500 accounts that had European-based offices. And so it's no longer a requirement, in all candor. Do we like to get people to Sacramento? Absolutely. Do we have to? No.
So I don't know if it negates my next question or not, but any thoughts on how we might cultivate a stronger innovation technology community here in Sacramento?
Open it up past Sacramento, because it's no longer relevant, and you can't go to the bars like you showed in the photos there. I mean, I'm in Nevada, I can walk down there and I can go do that stuff. And it's one of the things we had to adapt to. I took the first floor in the house and I converted it to an entire engineering wing with walking desks and stand-up desks and all the stuff that we had at our offices on J Street and offices that we had on Arden, because we weren't allowed to go to the offices, and I needed that collaboration. And so we all get on these big fancy conference call meetings. But it's not just the engineers in Sacramento, it's the engineers all over the world now. And it's the salespeople all over the world now. So I would say, to create better collaboration, go bigger.
All right, so I think I wanna, before I open it up to questions from the audience, I want one last question. Focusing on any challenges you've had, what in difficult stages you've gone through, and advice for how to get through those difficult challenges that every entrepreneur has to go through.
Embrace perseverance. There is no easy answer. It will be difficult. You will be doing this most likely alone. And if you give up, you lose. If you don't give up, then at least you can say, I gave it my all, and that was the outcome, and I can live with that outcome.
Awesome. Perseverance and grit. So thank you, Joshua. I want to now open it up to the audience. I don't know, Laura, have you been tracking the chat box? I haven't been able to do that while doing this. So anybody have any questions? Throw up your Zoom hand or throw a question in chat.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat yet. Or
right.
At least there weren't a minute ago. And Cameron wonders, should we take you guys off Spotlight so we could see everyone, or do you want to stay on Spotlight?
Definitely take me off. Josh will be the one answering the questions from the audience. So I think Spotlight Joshua, but not me. So, and Laura, I know that you always have questions. So you or Cameron, go ahead and ask the first question.
Yeah, well, I actually have two questions. The first one is for my amusement. What was one of the turkey names that you came up with when you were looking at rebranding, or one that you thought was, in retrospect, is pretty funny, if you want to share?
I can't recall any that were like that. They were pretty serious exercises. And honestly, I didn't pay too many attention. I do remember when we go through a handful of those thinking, no, but nothing that really kind of was like a knee slapping moment or something along those lines. We did really struggle though. Do we want to maintain the thesis and genealogy of the organization by name? And so we were looking at things like revenue source or revenue path to go with like DialSource or where we were going.
Yeah.
So that took quite a long time where we decided, do we want to leverage the brand recognition when we describe it moving forward? And we decided no, because that ultimately would pigeonhole us, we thought, into the same problem 2 years, 3 years down the road, which is how we restarted the exercise yet again and went with more abstract names like Conquer.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to hold my second question for a lull because we have a lot of questions now. I'll go, Carolyn, you had your hand up first. Why don't you go ahead and ask?
Great. Thanks, Joshua. It's nice to meet you. So I have a question about, and I have a feeling that this might be something that other folks have on their mind too. it's kind of the chicken and egg problem. You want to grow, but you need money to grow. And in order to get investment to grow, you have to have the money before you grow. Like, you have to have the growth before you can get the money. Like, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Did you come across that? And if so, how did you conquer it?
Yeah, so this is one of the benefits of doing this as a college student, so to speak. I mean, my bills were rather limited when I was an undergrad at Davis, even when I came out. So I was able to work in the beginning. I mean, I went from the internships into real estate, and I basically was working on refinance and sale transactions, making phone calls, and then I would probably spend 8 hours a day at that job. And then I'd probably spend another 4 to 8 given the day. I was working 7 days a week. And then I'd work on prototypes with my co-founder at the time. And then I'd take the prototypes and then I'd start working on them in my day for outreach. And that helped me close more deals. Then I started taking all the money that I was making in the real estate transactions to then invest back into the business so that we could then hire the second engineer and the third engineer. And I was managing sales. And this was before Facebook. So I was going to MySpace. I was finding businesses in Sacramento that were mortgage and real estate and insurers. Yep. And I was sending messages to those businesses about the value proposition because I didn't have their email addresses, but I could look up business on MySpace, then I could try and figure out title on MySpace. And I still have customers a decade and a half later from some of those emails.
Wow.
So in other words, you were already growing at a really good clip when you raised institutional investment for the first time.
Yeah, we were already 7 figures ARR.
Got it.
And your recurring revenue.
Which is what attracts the investors, no doubt.
Of course. Thanks, Joshua. Oh, are you going to share your contact information at some point, hopefully?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my cell phone's at the bottom of every email I send for that reason.
All right, so Alicia has the next question.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for sitting with us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
So I've been in the broadcast, radio, and television media industry since 1988. And I saw radio and television going to social media, you know. Mm-hmm. And anyone who got comfortable with social media, delivery, and being able to get on camera and all that, I knew would make it. I'm still nervous in front of a camera, but people say, oh, you're such a natural. I forced myself to do a lot of things alone, and having been laughed at and told, oh my gosh, she spends too much time on social media, you know, and things like that, being rejected and all of that. What kept you going? What were your processes to keep you moving to the end goal when you have been rejected, kicked around, laughed at, you know, made to feel like what you were doing was not on the right track? And mind you, I launched the country's first 24-hour live stream broadcast for Clon 4 television in San Francisco. I launched that in December of 2018. I was the first digital content producer in the country to do that. Nobody knows who I am. I don't really care if they know me. I love doing this innovative, pioneering kind of thing.
So to answer a couple of questions in there, I care very little what people think about me. The lion doesn't care what the gazelle thinks, it just eats the gazelle. It's just plain and simple. So I've got to go conquer those very difficult problems, and I'm going to take a data-driven approach to separate what I think I know from what I actually know, like mentioned by my board of directors. So I'm going to incrementally build a solution to a problem and present that problem back to the people. And if I am wrong, then I now have different data to cause an inflection point to go left or right or up the center or wherever I need to go based on that. So I would just focus on myoptically identifying what the results I need to go after for, and then build a solution around it. I mean, you know how many people told me I couldn't get any of this done? Just about everybody who didn't invest in my organization. I don't care what they think. I care what DCA thinks. I care what other investors think. I care about the people that work in my organization that have put in their blood, sweat, and tears 7 years, 8 years, 10 years with me. I care about the customers that have believed in our technology and watched us grow, like the Sacramento Kings, who asked me if I would participate in a meeting with the NBA League because of all the crazy things we've done with them over all these years. And it does not look like the same problem we're solving today versus pre-COVID versus 2 years versus 5 years ago. So I would say have confidence in tackling a problem. And if you make a mistake, iterate from it. Don't beat yourself up from it.
Okay. Michael, you've got the next question.
Hey, first of all, thanks for doing this. And secondly, but the monitor is here and the webcam is here. So there's a little bit of that's going on.
Don't worry about it. I got one here and here and up here.
So my apologies if this is a stupid question, but the question that I have is sort of about describing what you're doing. So like we're in a completely different sector. We're writing like a general purpose, or not a general purpose, but like a kind of general consumer app that lets people share a bunch of stuff. And the stuff that can get shared is related. But when I describe the app in terms of how the things are related, it sounds too abstract or too general and it can confuse people. So the strategy that I'm sort of starting to adopt is describing a thing in terms of one use case that's relevant to the person who I'm speaking to, getting them, and if they find out about the other stuff, then they find out about the other stuff. But I'm curious, like when you're pitching to investors, for instance, you can't really do that. You can't just drill into one of them. You kind of have to describe the whole thing that you're doing, I would think. So it's like, how would you resolve that sort of problem?
There's a lot to unpack there. Let's take it from a reverse approach. First thing is know your role audience that you're pitching to. If you're pitching to a CFO at a potential investor, then that individual is going to care about growth numbers, vision, execution, and reliability against that execution in those growth numbers. And if you do have a hard problem like a pandemic, you need to start terminating people as an example. What's your strategy? How do you go about it? They want to know, how do you handle adverse financial situations? That's very different from a CTO at an organization who's going to know your go-to-market product engineering strategy. So I would say identify the recipient that you're pitching to and then explain as little as possible with as few words as possible with the greatest value proposition possible for their specific role.
Got it.
I'm not going to speak to an engineer the same way I'm the VP of sales or a customer success, or a VC, or a friends and family investor. They're different roles.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
I think Arlene, you're up next.
Yeah, Arlene, thanks for the save.
Sure, thank you. Was the branding rebrand all done internally, or did you hire an agency?
It was all done internally. It was a huge testament to the quality of our marketing firm. I mean, marketing team, I should say, internally. But we spent years on that team, and it's just credit to Tim and the brilliant women on his team. They are amazing.
That's amazing.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And then Dominic, you had a question about fundraising.
That's a very valuable information you're giving us. I just want to know, what was your process like? You go straight to VCs, or you do family and friends round? Or was it hard? Did you have a lot of investors from Sacramento? What was your fundraising process like?
So my friends and family round, as I mentioned earlier, was I had some people that had come to me. I was having a conversation with just some friends. I was at, I think, a Luna Lounge over in the Arden Park area, having some beers like on a Friday night, discussing some of the challenges. And I pitched one of these early investors borrowing, I think, $150,000. I wanted to borrow it for growth. I wanted to hire one more engineer, or maybe 1.5 engineers. And I had the whole business plan, and they looked at me, they laughed at me, they bought a round of beers and said, "We don't want to give you $150,000 to borrow. We want to buy $300,000 of your business." And they signed it on a napkin and had drinks. And then I had some other smart investor friends that had been asking me to consider it. And I said, "I've just been convinced to do a friends and family round." And I went to them, and I raised in three couples $1.8 million in the span of like 2 weeks in our friends and family round. Then I immediately pivoted to go build a partnership with the Internship and Career Center from UC Davis. And I said, I need to help identify big brains. I need smart, hardworking people to help me identify and solve these problems. And then we created a PhD sanctioned internship program with the School of Engineering at UC Davis. And I spent that $1.8 million hiring engineers. And then we started selling some bigger products and some bigger customers. And I think I had 1 or 2 salespeople at the time. And then we raised our Series A, 5 million from DCA.
All right. Thanks for that, Josh. Michael has another question.
Hello again. Really quickly, and this is sort of a little bit more of a technical question. We made the decision early on, because you mentioned pivoting earlier, we've pivoted way too many times, and we just launched like relatively recently. So I'm assuming that that's going to continue. So we sort of just designed and we made decisions about how we wrote the code and designed the infrastructure in a way where we're sort of optimizing for flexibility and kind of rapid iteration. And that, like, I'm aware that that comes at the cost of like performance and maybe a couple of other things that are related to that. Yeah, technical debt. And I'm curious, like, in your experience, like, I'm aware of the fact that eventually we're going to have to redesign a whole bunch of stuff. When has that sort of come for you, and how do you sort of make those decisions?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So let's see, we've been in business 16 years. We'd say prototype, refractive dialer. Then we went to DialSource. That was more than 10 years. And then recently Conquer. Those were not name changes. Those were fundamental redesign from the hardware layer and the entire code base at that time, so we could maximize both together, because we wanted a name change to advance without a fundamental solution to some problem at the time. We would just simply have a name change. Then on top of it, our customers, so we're primarily B2B. There are B2C, like professional sports is a good example, where they could be calling Josh the individual because I have tickets, but then also Conquer the organization has floor seats for employees and everything else. So there's an example of where it can be both. I would say that it needs to be methodically looked at, but you're going to have to take technical debt. You're going to have to make difficult decisions. I have to do it all the time with my top developers and say, I need to get this series of feature sets complete in order to close this 7-figure deal for a monster organization I've been trying to close for 2 or 3 years. And then they're going to come to me and they're going to say, this is the risk assessment with your decision. This is what is going to be jeopardized if we make this commit. Then we have a business conversation about what are the dollars associated to making that opportunity cost of engineering and time decision, and then we'll make some analysis. That's the best way I could recommend making those type of decisions. On the flip side, I would say, how big is the technical debt that we're going to take on, and what resources do we need in order to backfill that technical debt? You're not going to have exact answers, but at least you can run like a SWOT model, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat on that, and then have a baseline to iterate and pivot in things as they change. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. That makes absolute perfect sense. Thanks.
Great question.
All right, so while we're waiting for a few people to raise hands, I have a question. Going to remote or distributed, whatever you want to call it, company culture, question about how do you maintain company culture in that kind of environment? And does DialSource have, like, I know a lot of companies have values and mission and that sort of thing. Did I call you DialSource? Does Conquer have that?
We do, but it started at DialSource, so you're not really wrong. Yes, we would get together at the Sutter Club, and we would do this, obviously pre-COVID, and we would try and do that like maybe twice a quarter with the VPs, and we would have those planning sessions. We'd cater out breakfast, lunch, we'd work all day, and then we sit around and have cocktails and then recap our notes, and we'd make it a day event with all the executives. We found that to be productive. Obviously, that's not quite as easy. My hobbies are, I like outdoor stuff, camping as an example. So one of the things that happened during COVID was I inverted my hobby and I inverted work. What I mean by that is, instead of taking a couple of my buddies and maybe a couple engineers and others to go camping on a weekend, We started going camping Monday through Friday in the middle of nowhere. Now, granted, I'm bringing out thousands of watts of solar panels and thousands of watts of lithium ion batteries. So all the engineers, 10, 12, 15 of them, can power MacBooks, sat phones, iPads to run their Zoom meetings. You got all these different Zoom meetings going on. That was amazing at building culture. In fact, Toast, one of our new big customers, the merchant service that does restaurants all over $10 billion business, they wanted being a customer of ours at the end of last year, and they brought up something interesting to your point. They said that due to COVID, they learned that vendors are not what they wanted moving forward because vendors need to be managed and partners manage themselves. So therefore, they were looking for partners to build culture with, not vendors to sell solutions. And so Toast awarded us being the first cultural partner of their organization with the Conquer launch in 2021. We take great pride in those type of stories, which were brought to us by our customers. And then in turn, the engineers that work on it, the CSMs that work on it, the salespeople that manage it all know that, and it makes them inclusive and included in all the hard work as well. So it's a challenging question right now. Like I said, I'm bringing up people to my house in Lake Tahoe and the organization as often as possible so that we can collaborate as much as possible, but then trying to figure these out. So we're doing things like we've got a major happy hour in downtown Sacramento. I think it's like June 19th. We're flying in people from all over the globe for this event. We're renting out some restaurants. We got people we haven't seen in a year and a half because we couldn't see them for the last year and a half. So we're going to do it there. We're going to do some stuff up here in Tahoe. We're maintaining presences in both. So that's a thing we need to pivot to and be dynamic so that we can continue to manage culture within our growing organization.
Okay. And do you guys have like a list of values that all companies have to, all employees get?
Yes, we have an employee handbook, code of conduct, a mission statement, a value statement that we constantly work on. So like we had our version for DialSource and then it changed for Conquer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Carolyn has the next question.
Yes. Hi. Thanks for answering another question.
My
Joshua.
pleasure.
So you talked about when you were scaling your startup, getting from being entirely virtual or remote, but I think local, and building it to a point where then you brought everybody into an office and went away from the virtual. And I assume now you're kind of in a hybrid model or
That's
looking
correct.
at a hybrid model.
We're in a hybrid model.
So at that point where you changed from being virtual to everybody in an office, what prompted you to do that? And do you, reflecting back, would you change anything?
Access to funding. We started opening up our offices, I think after the friends and family round, I think is when we opened up our first small offices on Fulton, because we actually had some cash to go spend on it. And I was always looking at opportunity cost of hiring the next developer or engineer instead of opening that office. And it was easy to manage culture with 5, 6, 10 people because we could just say, hey, let's go meet at this bar on a Wednesday or a Friday. Let's go have some pizza, some chicken wings and some beers. That got more difficult, obviously, going to 40, 50, 60 employees or even higher at our peak before the onset of COVID. So it was not difficult for us to pivot back to it because we had 8 years. It was kind of 8 years virtual, then 8 years in office. So we just went back to it, but not a lot of organizations had that. You know, a lot of our enterprise organizations were calling us to have these conversations saying, you know, I remember a conversation with Waste Management, one of our very large customers. It was basically saying, the business units that were on DialSource are more effective. So it sparked a conversation saying instead of spending $1.5 million on commercial real estate was to advance the departments within waste management on DialSource. So they expanded there and that's continued to occur here. So it's kind of like an ever-changing landscape. But yes, we are in a hybrid environment, multiple offices now.
So I'm sorry, I'm actually talking about the first change, not the more recent, but the first one going from with no office space to having everybody in an office space. If I understood you correctly, it was like, well, we've got the money. Why not have an office? Is that kind of
correct? Yes.
Okay.
That was when we decided to go to your question from the original just work from home model to the first office on Fulton. Was we had enough money where we said we think we can hire who we need to hire and we can have an office. We don't have to make a decision either or.
So you actually found it easier to maintain culture in an office rather than virtual. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I'd say it was accurate at the time, for sure. And for the next handful of years.
Sure. Okay, cool. Interesting.
Yeah, I think the norm kind of back then, not that it was that long ago, was like you worked remotely until you could afford to work together. I don't think that you were unique in that. But it's been interesting to see how the world is changing. And I wonder, by January, how are people going to be feeling when things, look like they'll be open up again? It'll be interesting to see if the change is really as permanent as we think it is.
I think it's going to be, to the point you made, Laura, it's going to be something different than what we think right now. It is going to be a hybridized model. So like when you look at our large customers, they have like an inside sales team, and then they have a field sales team, right? So the traditional field team, but it's not that anymore, and it hasn't been that anymore. And so the longer it went on, the more they had to pivot the business model and then make lasting decisions or change them based on the financials associated to them. And so now I think you're going to have something that's different. Inside sales is not the traditional inside seller, and field is not going to be the traditional field seller, because field is now having to adopt the technology that was traditionally used for that person sitting in a desk in an inside sales team. But because everybody was working from home during the pandemic, large organizations expect more transparency into their teams, because when you're working from home, you can't just walk across the sales floor and be like, hey, what are you working on? How can I help you on this? So I need more of those analytics into the CRM of record, Salesforce, Microsoft, or something along those lines, so they can see who's being effective, what strategies are being effective. A lot of it right now is everything has to be changed in strategy, what is working and what is not. And they need the analytics and the data to make intelligent decisions. And that's where I see the hybrid model defining that forward thinking for the next 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah. I know this isn't about me, but I was in outside sales for about 10 years. So I was used to a distributed or working from home if you're not at the customer kind of thing.
Totally.
So
I spent 10 years trying to get the field sales team in my large organizations. I was unsuccessful until COVID, because there was no such thing as a field sales team anymore.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Carolyn, did you have a follow-up question, or did I forget to lower your hand?
I'm good. I think I used up my allotment of questions.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, there's no rationing here. I think, Cornell, did you have a question you wanted to ask about vision? Oh, Alicia's got her hand raised too.
And Harsh Alicia does too.
Oh, okay.
Alicia and Harsh, and you said Cornell.
Okay.
Is it Cornell or Cordell?
Cornell.
Okay.
So my question is to follow up on what we left off on regarding inside sales and marketing, and how the money is going to, how we're going to keep our businesses going here in television and radio in particular. Radio and television ad sales are struggling, and they're really reaching. They're trying everything from, online or social media conversations and content development to try and,
And a guy like me will pay to not have those ads, pay for YouTube Premium, pay for all these different services at $10 or $15 a month, just so I don't have to deal with it, to make it more complicated.
Right, but then you have to market your business now on social media. To who, and who is the audience? You know what I'm saying?
Not really. So you have to think about, like, my economic buyer is going to most likely be a VP of sales for a large organization. Oversimplifying it, but that's a lot of where it starts. And so, yeah, we could be advertising on LinkedIn for those very specific roles with very specific messaging, like the video we played at the beginning of the meeting to them, which is a different type of approach than a B2C consumer on Facebook, which is what I am as an individual, versus somebody trying to sell Concur application software or development or certification or security analysis, et cetera. So I think it's a different answer for those industry segments. But it is definitely a challenge. I mean, like one of my first large customers in 2009 was Hearst Media Services. I spent I don't know, 9 months traveling around the country, deploying San Francisco Chronicle, Houston Chronicle, GQ, Oprah Magazine, like all those different business units on DialSource at the time. They were new to Salesforce in the 2009, 2010. And I remember having conversations with them at the Houston Chronicle site locations. I'm like, you have to move this advertising over to an iPad, because an iPad came out in 2009. The iPhone came out in 2007. And they wound up pivoting some of that kind of stuff. They're still customer. But yes, it's a complicated solution to solve for.
And what I'm finding as a former multi-skilled journalist, producer, is that I'm now creating content and marketing the content to like the city and county of San Francisco for their particular departments to advertise and to market what their departments are doing. For example, in the Human Rights Commission, they had their campaign for solidarity. So I went out to the campaign and I shot the footage. I put together a whole video and did the interviews and made it look like television, because they don't always get the media on them. And so I'm kind of creating the media buzz independently. And I'm doing my own analytics by just paying attention to the responses and the kind of support I'm getting. And the kind of support I'm getting is now invitations to apply for grants within the Human Rights Commission that will cover my cost.
That's great. I would say don't underestimate the power of a well-written, simple email around value proposition. A lot of people don't want to do it. It's always lost on me. It's something I have to coach all the time. When I get these like marketing template emails and you can tell it's a marketing template email, I'm not going to respond to that. I'm not even going to read it. I got too many other important emails I have to respond to. Once in a while, I can see that email. I'm like, that individual took some time to think about that message, make it simple, and send that message over. And that will get my attention. And I know that works for other executives that just don't have enough time in the day.
I'm sending them the finished product, the finished report on their event, without saying much else other than introducing myself. Here's what I covered. I hope you like it.
My advice, not knowing enough about it, would be point out the obvious things or things that may be obvious. Because it's close to us, because we're working on it, doesn't mean that somebody else will necessarily extrapolate all the things we want them to by simply reviewing it. So I have to coach my executives all the time to say, don't expect them to pull the value proposition out, lay it out and discuss it with them.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Harsh has the next question while Laura's muted and she can't say that. Go, Harsh, you're muted too.
I'm muted too, sorry. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks.
I'm
Joshua, first of all, thank you so much for great suggestion to all the community members over here. And yeah, it looks like you had great runway success with, you probably attacked the problem. You found the problem that you had yourself, and then you attacked it and then provided the solution, and then you built up the customers. A couple of questions. Did you have multiple customers before you reached your first Series A round? What advice do you have for those startup founders who probably have a good customer, but they're still working on the second customer? What kind of free deals for customers so that you get the VC traction? Any comments on those lines, would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So, lighthouse accounts are the lifeblood of an organization, and they change. When I started out, my lighthouse account was probably $5,000 a year. I remember very distinctly planning to get my first $10,000 single customer check. My lighthouse account now is eclipsing 3.5 million ARR. Changes, and there were incremental steps along the way. So you're going to have to do things to get that next biggest customer that needs to be highlighted as a benchmark layer success. And it goes back to the previous talking point where don't expect the customer to be able to articulate the reasons why they're successful, how they're successful, just because they are successful. discuss with them those variables, define those variables, agree with those variables, and then document and collateralize those variables. Because I guarantee you, just like DCA did as my Series A, or Camden as my Series B, or whoever may, if we do a Series C, will say, here are your top 5 accounts. I want to talk to them. Do they hate you? Do they love you? Can they live without you? And the VC is going to get here's why we cannot live without Concur. And you have to build those stories.
Okay. So did that finish it up for you, Harsh, or did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty good. One other thing was, I think it'll be nice if are you able to put your contact email information so that people who want to reach out to you can do that?
Sure. Yeah, it's Joshua@Concur.io. Nice and simple.
Yeah.
Or if you email me, Joshua@DialSource.com, that still forwards to the same place.
Okay, Cornell, do you have a question or some comments you'd like to make?
Yes, I want to say, Josh, thank you. And I want to ask you one question. I wanted to say, as being an entrepreneur, as starting your new foundation, how did you find your first, how would I say that, lifelong partner or investor?
So investors do not want to be lifelong partners. If they're lifelong partners, they're not going to have a liquidation event and then exit their money. So eventually they want to.
I mean co-founder. Person that works with you by your side. A person that wants to hear your vision. A person that wants to be there.
I got you.
Who understands.
My co-founder Omar has been my best friend since I was 10 years old. I'm 39. So we started the organization together. We've been talking shit to each other over Nintendo, Tech Mobile, all that good stuff. So it's people that we can really trust. Omar has my back. I have his back. It doesn't matter thick and thin. We've gone through litigation. We've gone through fundraising rounds. We've gone through global pandemics. I mean, it's a long list of things that we've gone through. So you need to find somebody. And I have bought out business partners. I have gone through several rounds of litigation to consolidate my original co-founder stack because they were a problem for the organization's vision and growth. And so it was just like, do you wait on cancer or do you cut out cancer? You cut it out. The surgeon gets you on the table right away and he cuts it out. And you got to make those decisions. Like I went to those individuals and I said, we have very different visions of what the future looks like. We don't agree on these things. That's okay. You want out, I'm going to buy you out. So let's go ahead and get these numbers together. That was very painful, very difficult, very expensive, stunted the growth of the organization. But I wouldn't be where I am now if that hadn't occurred. There would be no Concur today if that hadn't occurred. And Omar was there with me through all of that. So you need to get somebody who's going to have your back no matter what.
Thank you so much, Joshua. I want to thank you for everything you have said today, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Likewise. My pleasure.
All right. And I believe, thanks for that, Cornell. I think Jeff has a question.
Yeah. I want to go back to your response to Laura's question where you talked about aligning cultural values with partners or customers and how that has really become a core strategy or a trend that people want to align with people with similar values and cultural values. I wonder how you can talk about that, about how you're incorporating that into your sales process, or if at all, or what that trend is looking like in your strategy for the future.
Yeah, so it's like a four-legged table, I guess. So from our perspective, it is the sales cycle to demonstrate value proposition and resolution to problem. Then it goes into a customer success derivative where a CSM gets in and talks about what are the problems we want to solve specifically in the configuration, which then leads to the implementation of the product. And then it kind of goes back to the CSM. And then we go back to the customers to understand any gaps of things they would like to have. And then it goes back to the engineering team, which is the largest organization in Concur and was in DialSource. And so we're constantly looking at those four pillars so that we can identify ways in which to strengthen them and provide redundancy within them and to share insights across them. And so it's a very difficult thing to do. Generally, engineers and salespeople don't like to engage with each other very much. And so we've gotten to the point where they love enjoying working with each other, and they go out on their, forget Conquer happy hour events. They go out on their own in downtown Sacramento all the time, and they go have drinks together and dinner together. And we could be walking downtown, see 10 of our people just sitting over there together. That wasn't a formal event at all. And that's the culture that was built within the organization. And then the dissemination of how to identify and solve problems together. Because I mean, Davis did a case study on us, I don't know how many years ago, then a couple times. We were taking MBA students to work with engineers, to work with sales leaders internally to create these little internal think tanks. And then companies like the ADPs and the Paychecks and the Waste Managements were coming back to then replicate what we were doing at their monster organizations, little old DialSource that was doing those kind of things. And so it's maximize the impact and effectiveness of the people within the organization.
Thank you. Looks like Michael's up next.
Hi again. One last question.
Sure.
And this is sort of about like time allocation. So like in the beginning, when your company is literally just you, like the way that I've sort of split up the time that's available is I've sort of said like, okay, I'm going to spend half the time doing product development and the other half doing like some combination of like networking, sales, customer acquisition, user acquisition, whatever, right? Like something in that sort of sphere. And I'm curious for you, because like left to my own devices, like I like programming and like I'll just program and not do any of the other stuff that I need to do.
That could be a dangerous pitfall. Some of my best developers have that issue.
Yeah, so it's like I'm trying to put it, like I'm trying to impose like structure so that
Sure.
I'm forced to do all of the other stuff. And I'm curious, like in the early days for you, did your sort of time split approximate that, or was it different?
What I was doing then and what I would do now would be very different things, because I just have a lot more experience than I did back then. So let me give you a couple books I read that answered the question that you asked that was helpful for me. One is from Harvard School of Business. It's called Getting the Right Work Done. It basically states that the human brain is not designed for multitasking work. And what you should do is you should take your most complicated problem, work on it for a specific set of time in the morning, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever it is. And then when you're done, move on to the next thing and you work your way progressively or regressively towards the end of the day. So as you're kind of getting burnt out after 15, 16 hours, you're working on something that is less complicated. Phenomenal book on reading for that. I would also say Crossing the Chasm. That's like one of the Bibles for how to build a complicated tech organization, also from Harvard School of Business. Clayton Christensen, one of my investors who was the CFO of Cisco, was one of his proteges at Harvard. And then I'd also say lastly, I make all my people read this book, all of these books I'm recommending, Only the Paranoid Survive. That is by Andy Grove, who was the CEO and founder of Intel Computers.
Okay.
That will give you a lot of answers that you're asking for, and I think questions that will come downstream once you have those answers.
I heard about the last two. I'm going to read all three. Thanks so much, man.
You got your homework cut out for you, Michael.
But kind of, Michael, to the question, I mean, like I had more time to read those things, you know, when it was just a few people. And that's where I would spend my time in my evenings and on my weekends. Or if I got to take a little vacation, laying out in the sun or something like that on my Kindle, reading one of those type of books. I have less time to do that because we're now a global organization working global sales timelines. I mean, 24 hours a day.
Right. I'll do it now.
Laura, you're up.
All right. So this question the answer doesn't have to be related to work, but do you have a favorite podcast that you like to listen to?
That's a good one. I don't consume very many podcasts. I'm kind of an oddball. When I'm driving long distances, I don't listen to anything. No music, no podcasts. That's when I can run SWOT models in my head. That is where I can solve my problems, where nobody else can bother me unless they call me on my cell phone. Then I'll take it on Bluetooth and go back to solving my problems.
All right. Well, alternate question then. You play video games?
No, I did in college.
You did in college. Okay. All right. I give up on my questions.
Any other questions out there?
I mean, with my original engineering team, we used to do that in my house in Arden Park. We would get together, sit at the dining room table. We'd work all day. We'd play World of Warcraft in the evenings or on the weekends. It's probably like 2006, something like that. And we'd work on those problems. But now what I'll do is, like I mentioned, where I took a dozen of my engineers to go camp by a lake at 8,000 feet in Truckee, and we set up barbecues. We went to Costco, we got bison steaks, tequila, beer, Trulies, whatever anybody wanted. And that way everybody's kind of hanging around the campsite, looking at a waterfall, looking at a lake, kind of socializing. Because what I find is when people are playing video games, doing those other activities, they're generally not interacting. I mean, they are in chat. It's not the same as sitting across from a campfire while you're making s'mores or barbecuing chicken or whatever it may be at the campsite.
Yeah.
Or at the house.
Yeah. Nothing better than a campfire.
Agreed.
All right. Alicia, I guess you have a question, and then I think we're going to wrap up, Jeff. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you had a group of 12-year-old boys around you for a weekend, what would some of the activities be that you direct for them?
I would say similar, like with the engineering team. I mean, going camping.
And girls, I'm sorry. Let me add the girls. Let me add some girls in there too. Sorry.
Sure. And we do this within these type of events as well. I would say my answer still doesn't change what I would do with adults right now. Going out to the lake, going out and hiking, going out and discussing product. I mean, when my team goes out with me into those areas, we're generally like people are coming out of their tents 5 to 6 in the morning. We're making coffee. We're making scrambled eggs. We're already working. We're sitting around making scrambled eggs at like 5:30 in the morning, talking about what we all need to do in our various business units. And then maybe we'll take a walk, because you can just walk down the dirt trail between the pine trees. Or when we're barbecuing dinner, we're still talking product. We're still solving problems. We're sitting on the campfire. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this with 12-year-olds, but with adults, we're having alcohol. But it could be whatever it is that we're having over there. It's the same thing, I think. Maybe less complicated, depending on the 12-year-olds and depending on the 25-year-olds. But honestly, I don't think the answer changes very much. I kind of find myself going back into the activities that I liked to do when I was a little kid. Go play in the lake, go for a hike, go ride the bicycle, go get some fresh air.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Josh. Thanks, Alicia. Jeff, you want to bring it home?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Joshua. We really appreciate the time, the insights, the experiences you've shared with the community. Lots of great stuff here. And for those listening, we are recording this.